Chapter 21. The dining room was softly lit in a golden light, and on the table, right in the middle of the room, sat a family of 5, with 5 more vacant seats. At the head of the table sat an aged man with a ruddy face and solemn grey eyes that had lost their original color over the decades. This man was Lin Woodave, father of Lin Hartian, a bastard child of the House of Lin in Beijing, who along with his mother arrived in Sumerian city 70 years ago to make a name for himself. In name he did make, and fortune too. Good evening, President Lin. Keith smiled at the old man and politely greeted him as soon as he arrived together with Celine. The old man raised his head and looked Keith in the eyes. A strange gleam passed his expressions before he nodded his head and gestured him to take a seat on the table. I am no longer the president of the Lin Group, young man. He spoke lightly, yet it sounded heavy in everyone's ears. THR City remembers you as such, and rightly so. Keith shook his head and turned to look at the middle-aged man who was going to soon hit his 50s. You seem well, Chairman Lin. Lin Hartian glanced at him and only nodded before returning his attention to making a tea for himself. Welcome to the Lin mansion, young Master Demiliore, a bubbly voice called out, which belonged to a Chinese woman in her late 30s. She was not a breathtaking beauty, but still possessed a charming grace that added to her attractiveness. Thank you, Mrs. Lin. He smiled and replied to the second wife of Lin Hartian before turning to the young boy who was looking at him with an ardent expression. And how are you doing, Lin Horan? The boy seemed surprised at the fact that Keith knew his name and politely stood up from his seat before bowing to him. Welcome to the Lin mansion, Heir Demiliore. I am doing fine, he replied cheerfully, but still adhered to his etiquette. Lin Horan was the child of Lin Hartian from his second wife, Lin Meiyang, which made him king of his half-brother, and as the only male child, he was the heir to the Lin fortune that his grandfather had laid the foundation to and accumulated. And from the way he looked at Keith, it was clear that he admired the latter a lot. Kinyu was a little anxious that Keith would find the silence at the table quite awkward, but as time passed and everyone silently ate their meals, she found him only focusing on his meal, not bothered at all, which eased her worries and surprised her too. Thank you for saving Celine, young Demiliore. Lin Woodave spoke after dinner was over, and his voice bore an evident gratitude. You're welcome. Keith nodded to him and lightly smiled at Celine who was dotingly looking back at him. Seeing Keith not playing with words, Lin Woodave was impressed and appreciatively nodded his head. Celine told me that you practice an inherited medical skill. I won't pry much into it, but I am curious. Where does it originate from? The old man's question caught attention to the stoic Lin Hartian as well, who directly looked at Keith for the first time tonight. What I practice is a combination of Western and Eastern medicine. I am well versed in both of them, but the true essence of my medicine skill lies in the arcane teachings that go well beyond the scope of the science that the world has discovered. To what extent? Lin Woodave narrowed his eyes and asked. I can make a person cheat death for enough time. Keith did not look the old man in the eyes as he spoke his words and lightly sipped on the white wine. But of course, death wins nonetheless. Kinyu frowned as she heard his words and the anxiety in his heart soon dawned on her expressions. Don't worry, he's not talking about Celine. Lin Woodave dotingly looked at his granddaughter and chuckled lightly before getting up from his seat. You are an interesting boy. He shook his head and walked out of the dining room slowly, with a straight back but shaking steps. Kinyu has informed me about your treatment plan for my wife, and despite my skepticism, I am still hopeful that you would be able to cure her. Do let us know if you need anything. Aunt Celine will be fine, Chairman Lin. Keith assuring nodded to Lin Hartian, who too walked out of the room after nodding back at him. I hope you did not mind the silence at the table, Mr. Demiliore. Lin Meiyang spoke as soon as her father-in-law and husband exited the dining room. It's fine. Keith shook his head. I am used to the silence, and I have learned to appreciate it over time. Do send my regards to the chef, the dinner was delicious. I will do so. Meiyang nodded her head with a bright smile before briefly glancing at her stepdaughter and then meaningfully looked back at Keith. Forgive me for prying, but I am curious about the beautiful girl whom you accompanied to shop on Friday morning. I was in the mall and I happened to see you two there. Is she your girlfriend? Keith raised his head and looked her in the eyes, reading through her intentions, but still kept calm and focused back to sipping his white wine. Her name is Nana. She's my personal assistant and a lover, he answered honestly, not paying attention to Kinyu, who had suddenly turned stiff after hearing his words. His blunt honesty even took Meiyang by surprise, and for a moment she couldn't decide how to reply back to him. A lover, eh? Celine chimed in merrily and mischievously raised her brow at him. Yup, Keith couldn't help but chuckle at her frankness. You said it yourself, I am a heartthrob. Han, so I guess she isn't your only lover then. Celine cried in, and intently looked at him. Maybe, he shrugged his shoulders, and then smirked at Celine. I might be inviting you to my wedding in the near future, but that is if everything goes well tomorrow. What? Kinyu impatiently spoke out, and when Keith turned to look her in the eyes, she bravely fought off her embarrassment and looked him back in the eyes. Since when does Heir Demiliore have a fiancée, or are you planning on marrying your lover? I do have a fiancée, yes, but she's not the one I am talking about. Keith lightly smiled at her and then looked back at Celine who was waiting for him to spill the beans. Let's just say that I am expected to take more than one wife. Family duties. You sound like the idea of multiple wives does not excite you. It's all the more responsibility. He did not say anything more than that and feigned to show a thoughtful expression as he sipped on his wine. What's her name? Who? The girl you are meeting up with tomorrow? Celine asked. Amelia Montel. Keith answered honestly and smiled as he found Celine failed to recall any family name that was Montel. She's from Magic City, and Montel family is not a business giant. But they are special enough for you to take their daughter as your wife. She thoughtfully asked, but to her surprise, Keith simply shook his head. Not really. Her family means nothing to me. All I am interested in is her. Is she that beautiful? The little Miss Lin asked with narrowed eyes. Yep, she could give you a tough competition. Keith chuckled at her. Want to come with me tomorrow to go see her? No, thanks. Kinyu hurriedly shook her head. I have an appointment with my friends tomorrow. She made up an excuse and threw it at him before getting back to the topic she was now very much invested in. And who is your fiancé? He smiled lightly at her question and sank back in his seat. And Angelini. His answer only made Kingu furrow her brows, but Celine had her eyes widened in shock as she knew better than her daughter about the enmity between the two giants of Cimmerian city. And the same could be said for Lin Ming, who was unsure if she should be happy about the news or feel worried. Chapter 22 Inches. It's a beautiful place, isn't it? Keith lightly smiled when he saw the ever so attentive Yinjing sneaking glances at the beauty of the magic city. I am just curious because I have never been here before. And yes, master, the city is almost as beautiful as Cimmerian. Most consider it more beautiful than Cimmerian, he said, and then turned to look at the beautiful green hills and the distant mountains. When one hears the name, Magic City, for the first time, they are bound to be skeptical about how it got that name, but as soon as they arrive here, it all makes sense to them. This place was simply magical, and its heritage of over 3,000 years added to its mysticism and made it stand amongst the most ancient cities of the world. Situated on the other end of Netherrealm from the Cimmerian city, with a time zone difference of +4, the city rarely got the annual snowfall, but despite that it was mostly winter here, with temperatures never exceeding 16 degrees Celsius even in summers. They had already left the main city behind them, and right now, their convoy of 5 vehicles were en route to the Montail estate that was situated on one of the hills on the outskirts of the Magic City. Beautiful, yet deceivingly peaceful. Cesar too brushed his eyes on the beauty of the place, but then lightly smiled and shook his head. Yinjing frowned at his words, but Keith understood what Cesar meant. He had received all the reports of the recent events of the city. The Cold War that had been going on for over 2 decades had only recently ended, leaving the ancient houses that lost it in a dire situation. And the house of Montail was one of them. When they came to a stop at the gate of the Montail estate, it was well past noon, but they had made it just in time for lunch. After a brief inspection at the gate, the guards allowed the convoy to enter the estate, and soon they arrived at the mansion where the main family of the Montail house resided. Welcome to the house of the Montail. It's a pleasure to be here. Keith looked at the aged man with a light smile, and replied with the same courtesy before straightening his back and extending his hand forward. Keith Demiliore, he introduced himself. The aged man, who looked to be in his late 40s, a couple of decades younger than his real age, was quite surprised at the demeanor with which Keith carried himself. But the man masked his surprise well and accepted the handshake. Vladimir Montail, the heir to the house of Montail. The guards that had arrived with Keith had already taken their positions, and only Cesar, Yinjing, and Victor stood behind Keith. Cesar took the lead to introduce himself as the head butler of the Demiliore family, and after Yinjing and Victor stated their names, the 4 of them were invited inside the mansion by Vladimir. Keith wore an amused smile as he saw the little kids curiously looking at him and whispering to each other about his group of guests. The current head of the house of Montail was Alaric, who was the uncle of Vladimir, and grandfather of Amelia. The old man was in a very lively mood today, and so was everyone present in the house of Montail. It was not hard to understand the reason behind it. Cesar had been very straightforward about their intentions when he contacted the house of Montail last night, and by the looks of everything, the older generation had already decided to accept Keith's proposal. And why wouldn't they? The bride price they were offering to the house of Montail was an astronomical amount, something which they needed terribly to make sure they could raise their next generation under the perfect conditions. Amelia has been informed of your arrival, and she will be here in a few minutes. An enthusiastic woman informed him, and Keith knew that she was the wife of Vladimir. Yinjing was faring quite well in this place. Cesar seemed not affected at all by the atmosphere, but Victor was a little overwhelmed. It was first time for him to see an ancient family of horrors. Everyone here was an aura, and even the children were on their paths to laying the foundations for their future cultivation. Some were still working on their aura circulation, and a few were even working on their body refinement. What was astonishing to him was that Alaric was someone who oozed an oppressive feeling that was much stronger than that of Cesar. And Victor knew that Caesar was a powerhouse of spirit profound realm. Something that really disturbed him was the presence of more than a dozen people here who were just as strong as Yinjing. He felt quite weak, but at the same time, he was yearning to free his hands a little and test himself against them. As a family of horrors, those that appreciated strength more than others, Vladimir had already sneakily inspected Keith when they shook their hands, and he was quite happy with what he found. An 18-year-old at the peak of Foundation Profound Realm was not considered a monstrous talent, but Keith would still be considered a decently talented aura, and it was a welcome surprise for him and his family. And of course, Keith knew everything about it. The Great Hall of the Montail mansion was similar to a throne room, with the only difference being the absence of a throne. Everyone sat on the carpeted floor, in 2 rows, with the older generation on one side, and the young sitting in front, facing their elders. There were no servants inside the mansion, and the ladies of the family were busy setting up the lunch on the short-legged long tables set between the 2 rows. The dining tradition of the Montail family was completely opposite of what he had been used to. Nobody here ever ate in silence, and the meals usually lasted for nearly 2 hours with all the talk and chat everyone indulged in. It was a lively atmosphere, and he welcomed it even if he was not used to it. Amelia, a little boy excitedly called out a name, which caught everyone's attention, prompting them to look towards the entrance of the hall. Standing easily at 5 feet and 8 inches tall, the bespectacled girl was quite on the thin side. However, her figure was mostly hidden under the loose sweater that she wore. It not only covered her torso, but also her hips and half of her thighs. Just to look at her was enough for anyone to understand that she did not like showing even an inch of her skin, and by the confidence oozing out of her, it was evident that she had no interest in the opinions of the opposite sex. Just like everyone else in the family, she too had raven hair, which were tied in a ponytail, and brilliant green eyes that calmly greeted the elders in the family before settling near Keith as she approached him. A few elders frowned when they saw that she had put no effort in dressing up well, but none said anything. They were used to her behavior by now, and those that knew her better were just happy that she even showed up. Keith smiled lightly when Amelia simply nodded to him before citing at the vacant spot on his left. Now, any other person would have felt quite awkward at her behavior, where she had simply ignored him, but Keith was someone who knew everything about her. He understood her better than she understood herself. And right at the moment he first laid eyes on her, everything he had read about her in one of the stories in his dream was now brilliantly flashing in his mind. He did not miss out on even a single detail of her life. Keith Argus Demiliore. He lightly smiled as he turned to her and offered her his hand. Amelia too turned to look at him, and as their eyes met, they both felt their hearts skip a beat. For Keith, it was her beauty and an inexplicable feeling that captivated him, and for Amelia, it was the uncomfortable feeling that she could not escape from his eyes. It was a silly notion that he knew all her secrets, and Amelia brushed it aside and offered her hand to him. Amelia Jean Montail, a beautiful name. Keith nodded to her and then simply leaned in, surprising everyone who had been watching them. Amelia's eyes widened at his action, but she could see that he was not leaning in for a kiss, and so she allowed him to approach her ear. I know all your secrets, Princess of Runes. Keith whispered so lightly that only she heard him, but as her heart pounded at his words, it caught the attention of some. Her mind went black, and she sat there staring in his direction with unfocused eyes. And Keith just flashed her his brilliant smile before adjusting his position and engaging in a chat with the elders once more. When Amelia finally caught her bearings, she immediately turned on her indifferent persona, and silently sat there, showing no expressions on her face. No one could have guessed by looking at her that her mind was in complete chaos, and she felt a sinking feeling in her heart. However, as the time passed, and she secretly stole a few graces at Keith, she found herself growing agitatedly curious about him. The result that Keith was looking forward to. Chapter 23. Watching him take his seat at her study table, and then unceremoniously go through her design book, agitated her even more. And then there was the occasional sound of him helping himself to some pistachios as he turned the pages over. After nearly an hour of silence, Amelia, as patient as she was, could not bear the tension that was gripping her nerves. I think we should talk, Mr. Demiliore. She spoke determinedly after taking a deep breath. Keith's hand, which was halfway down turning a page, stopped and then fell to close the personal design book of the lady, whose boudoir he was sitting inside. He turned the seat around and then looked her right in the eyes. We can talk, but first you must get these glasses of yours out of the way. He lightly said, we both know that your eyes are perfectly fine. And there it was again, the sinking feeling in the pit of her stomach. How did he know about it? It was a question she was rather scared of. Amelia looked him in his deep brown eyes, and seeing the mischievousness sparkling in them, she decided to not play around and did as asked. You are beautiful, he offhandedly commented after she took off her glasses, and then leaned back in his seat. What do you want to talk about? His question only ended up making her feel more agitated, but after a minute of contemplation, she severely looked him in the eyes. What do you want, Mr. Demiliore? Not messing around, are we? He chuckled to himself and then closed his eyes. I want you, Miss Amelia. I want a wife who can stay shoulder to shoulder with me, and share the responsibilities with me. He opened his eyes and sincerely spoke. Amelia looked as if she had not heard what he had said, and her eyes still pressed him to state his true intentions. However, even after minutes of waiting, she got no more words from Keith, who simply kept looking at her right in the eyes. May I see your eyes? He suddenly asked, and his question unnerved the lady who was trying her best to stay composed. How do you know so much about me? She did not listen to his request and gravely asked. If I told you that a dream guided me to you, would you believe it? He playfully spoke and chuckled when he saw her gaze getting more severe. It does not matter what you believe or not. His persona suddenly took a 180 degrees turn and then he seriously looked at her. What I have said is the truth. Seeing the smile vanishing from his face strangely made her feel better. At least, he was not going to play around anymore. Even if she found it hard to believe, she could feel that he was not lying about that dream of his. And what do you know about me? I know what you like, what you dislike. I know how you grew up, and I know what you desire in life. I know things about you that you already know, and I know things about you that you are yet to figure out. She was again tempted to ask how he knew everything, but then remembered the answer he had just given her. Prove it. Ask what you want to ask, and I shall reply to you. But know that I won't tell you everything, because there might be things that you are not yet ready to hear. Amelia frowned at his words, and her curiosity only flared up even more at what he was implying. Tell me the truth about my runes. Why do I have these powers? Powers. Keith chuckled at her choice of words. She was not wrong at all, but it just sounded funny to him. You are one of the inheritors of the runic monarch. Your physique is special as you possess the runic monarch profound veins. The runes you see in your dreams is the knowledge that these profound veins provide you. You are only in the great profound realm right now, so the knowledge you have so far gained is only elementary. His words made her quite shocked, and now she finally had an answer for what was going on with her. She was not surprised that Keith saw through her realm, which was hidden under the runes that she had inscribed on her body. No one in the Montail family knew how strong she was. For all they knew, she had been stuck at the peak of Foundation Profound Realm for the past 7 years. What is the strange door that I keep seeing in my dreams? That mystical palace. That's the first trial ground that the runic monarch left behind. There's a test for you inside of it, and if you pass it, there are special rewards for you. Also, that palace is inside an independent dimension and is simply a treasure trove. There are lots of good things for you there. Keith did not keep this information from her and truthfully told her everything about the trial ground. How do I enter that place? She did not doubt his words and simply asked. You cannot access that dimension from the world we are in right now. He shook his head. We both are also not strong enough to enter that place, and it's something that we should not be concerned about for now. She frowned at his choice of words. Others can enter that place too. Anybody who meets the requirements can enter that dimension, but only the inheritor of the runic monarch can take the test. Amelia stayed silent after she heard his words, and Keith let her stay occupied with her thoughts. Who was the runic monarch? A god. And even among the gods, he was at the top of the pyramid of hierarchy. She had speculated that after hearing his previous answers, but hearing him confirm it shocked her beyond belief. Be mine, and I will make sure that you will become in existence just as strong as the previous runic monarch, if not more powerful. Keith devilishly spoke those words, and it was not just an empty promise. He was confident that he could help her reach such heights. His words caught her attention and then her eyes narrowed at him. And how will you achieve that? That's my secret. He smiled at her and did not shy away from her gaze. What do you want in return? She straightforwardly asked. I have already told you, I want you. He replied. You will be one of my queens, and we will rule over the worlds. His ambitious words only made her pride flare up, and briefly, her eyes that were hidden under the contacts flashed a brilliant golden glow. Amelia had never thought that her day would turn up like this. When she had learned that the heir of Demiliore family had asked for her hand and was coming to see her today, she was quite displeased and agitated. Getting married was never one of her priorities, and she only wanted to uncover her mystery whilst exploring more of her powers. She thought that she could somehow delay this marriage and if possible, reject the offer after talking in private, but all her plans came crashing down when he whispered those words in the family hall. I know all your secrets, Princess of Runes. And here she was now, already feeling bound to him. Tell me your secret, and I will be yours. An elated smile graced his lips when he heard her words. I have lots of secrets, my dear Amelia. He playfully spoke, but for now, know that a dream has put me on a mission. Keith knew that his answer did not satisfy her, but he did not want to say anything about his secrets. I will see you tomorrow night, and we will discuss things further. She stood up from her bed and waited for him to take his leave for now. You know, your family is waiting for an answer, he teased her a little as he stood up, and found her eyes narrowing at him. You can go ahead and discuss the bride price with my family. I need to get some rest now. She pressed on him to leave her alone, and Keith complied. Be safe. He nodded to her and then turned around to leave the room. Only after he arrived outside and the door behind him closed, did he sigh in relief. He took a deep breath and let his heart beat in all its anxiousness that he has been suppressing all this time. It was never easy to talk with smart people, but there was something that they lacked. And what they lacked was the mind to raise some stupid questions, which sometimes hit the mark and were the hardest to answer. Thankfully, his talk with Amelia went smoothly, and even if he was pushed in the corner a few times, he got around by spinning the truth, rather than outright lying to her about anything which would have proven detrimental in the future. Young master, Cesar was waiting for him down the hallway, and Vladimir was right by his side. We can discuss the bride price, Uncle Vlad. Amelia has agreed to marry me. He gave him the good news and saw a brilliant smile appear on his face. We are satisfied with the terms that you have already put forward, young Demiliore. And all now remains is a date for the wedding ceremony. I need to talk about that with Amelia first. She has invited me to come to visit her tomorrow night. You are welcome to come to the house of Montel any time you wish to, young Demiliore. Thank you for your hospitality, Uncle Vlad. We will take our leave now. You could stay here at the mansion if you want. I will arrange rooms for you. There's no need for that. We have some business to attend to as well, and so we must take our leave for now. As you wish. Vlad nodded to him and then escorted both of them outside the manor, where Yinjing and Victor were already waiting with their car. Take care. When the convoy of cars exited the gates of Montel estate, Victor finally let his clumsy side show up. That was one scary family of horrors, he commented, which prompted all of them to lightly smile at his words. You should know that Montel are not the only ancient family in Netherere, or even in the Magic City. Cesar seriously told him. There are some even more powerful and more ancient than them, which even our Demiliore family cannot provoke. An awkward silence lingered in the car after Cesar spoke those words. Where to, young master? Victor decided to change the topic and asked Keith. Let's go and eat something light. Only the four of us. Keith rested his head back and looked at the beautiful scenery outside the window. Old Street, Commercial Market. There's a restaurant there by the name of the Silver Lounge. Cesar heard the words and immediately searched for the location on the GPS before pinning it. And Victor informed the guards in the other cars to separate at the next junction, instructing them to reach the hotel first. Even if the old man was curious why Keith wanted to go to the specific restaurant, he did not raise any questions. And while they drove, he prepared a summary of the events before he sent them to Keith's grandfather, and also to Vanessa. She had strictly instructed him to keep her updated with everything that transpires with the Montel family, and as the head butler, he had to keep the lady of the house informed about such an event. Chapter 24. The restaurant Keith picked surprised the three of them. They knew that their young master preferred eating in private booths, but this place was an open lounge, and the place was nearly at full capacity for the evening. Luckily, they managed to get themselves a prime table, which was in the corner above a short platform, providing them the full view of the hall, as well as the best view of the stage, where a grand piano was placed. It was not an expensive place, but it was not cheap either, which meant that most people present inside the lounge either belonged to the working middle-class people. Of course, there were some rich too, as well as some civil servants, who were enjoying a meal with their guests and colleagues. Surprisingly, there was a good number of youngsters in the lounge, most likely the students of the Magic University, which was not far from this place. Their group caught the attention of nearly everyone, and the reason was simply the devilish looks of Keith that hooked them all. There were some youngsters who were sneaking glances at the girl by his side too. Yinjing was wearing high boots and fitted pants, which accentuated her long legs. And even though the black trench coat hid her figure, it was not hard to guess that she was a gorgeous lady. Unlike his three companions, Victor was not reserved at all as he ran his eyes all over the place, taking his time appreciating all the pretty ladies in the restaurant. He was not a licentious man. He was just a simpleton who enjoyed appreciating the fairer sex. Order whatever you want. Keith smiled at Victor and gave him a free pass. He knew that his bodyguard had not been feeling well at the Montel mansion, and observing his role, he had not eaten properly. The same was the case with Yinjing, but Keith did not need to tell her about it. She was a smart girl and knew how to take care of herself. Everyone ordered what they wanted, with Cesar and Keith getting themselves a light supper and some good wine. Uncle Cesar, is there any music group under the Demiliore Media Empire? Keith casually asked as he sipped on his wine and looked through some information on his phone. There are a few where the family owns some shares, and then there is a small independent record label, but it is not a big one. Your mother owns it privately, and it is not under the Demiliore Consortium. Of the ones that the family has shares in, Red Peppers. What's the worth of the independent one? Keith cut in and stopped looking at his phone. Your mother just bought it out of boredom when she was in university, and it has some decent music artists under its banner. It has grown over the years, and currently, it's valued at around 200 million neres. Lady Vanessa named it Black Jay Records and it is now famously known as BJ Records. Is that so? Keith frowned and contemplated for a moment before picking up his phone and making a call to his mother. Keith, Vanessa cheerfully called out as soon as she picked up the phone. Missed me? Of course, I did. He chuckled and replied, yes, now tell me why you rang me up. Is there something you need my help with? I wanted to ask if you would be willing to gift me one of your private companies. He asked without any hesitation or embarrassment. Which one? Black Jay Records. His answer surprised her and she remained silent for a few seconds. What do you plan on doing? She finally asked. The plan is to nurture a future asset. The girl, Vanessa, mischievously inquired. Yes, but I am not playing around. She's a treasure, and he proceeded to tell her a few things about her. Their conversation caught the attention of the three people on the table, and Yinjing frowned as she failed to recall any girl around Keith who was so talented in music. I will contact me and transfer the company under your new group. It will be done within a few hours. Vanessa did not drag the conversation and gave Keith the answer he already expected. His mother would never deny him any such request, and he knew he had the company under him as soon as he had stated his request. Thank you, mother, he gratefully said, to which Vanessa snorted and ended the call. Master, who is the girl you are talking about? Yinjing asked as she could not contain her curiosity. Her name is Alana, she's 16 and is about to show up on that stage in 7 minutes. He gestured to the piano and grinned at the disbelief on their faces. I am serious, you will see for yourself. And see, they did. Exactly after 7 minutes, a young girl of average stature, chocolate hair, and light brown eyes stepped onto the stage. She was wearing a uniform that was the same as the waitresses in the restaurant but with a bow tie at the base of her neck. After bowing her head to the audience, most of which were not even paying any attention to her, she sat on the bench and checked her ponytail one last time before pulling off the lid and uncovering the keys of the piano. As her slender finger touched the keys, a soothing melody started, prompting everyone to turn to look at her. The innocence reflecting on her face as she played the piano with half-lidded eyes hooked all the males to her. She was not breathtakingly beautiful, but she was stunning in her own right. And wearing that maid-like waitress uniform only attracted the opposite sex to her more. However, even if they were basking in their lustful thoughts towards her, it did not take long for them to utterly fall in love with the melody she was playing. It was not some famous melody that these people had heard before. In fact, no one in the audience had ever heard this beautiful piece of piano. Only Keith knew that Alana was playing her own music, a piece that she had probably only come up with on a whim. That was how godly gifted she was in music. She's good. Cesar nodded his head in appreciation after hearing Alana play a few pieces of her music. Almost as good as you, young master. Keith chuckled at his words and shook his head. Yes, he was proud of his gift in music, and perhaps he was a little better than the girl they were listening to, but it was only because it had only been a few months since she touched the piano. Of course, he would not tell Cesar that. Keith signaled to the waiter and then ordered a couple of bottles of the most expensive wine they had in the restaurant. The four of them sipped on their wines and silently listened to the music the girl was playing. The light smile on her face as she played the music left little to doubt the girl's utter love for music. She was simply enjoying herself, oblivious of the fact that her music was playing with the emotions of the people around her. As he kept looking at her, her future was flashing through his mind. She was not just some random girl who was immensely talented in music, but she was the main heroine of A Child of Destiny. He had already put his clutches on Amelia, but something inside of Keith was warning him to not overdo anything with the girl in front of him. Not that he planned to do anything reckless, but he did not plan to leave her on her alone either. Keith calmly stood up from his seat and applauded for the little girl who had stopped playing to take a short break. And since he was not the only one who did it, the little girl only bowed to the audience and sat back on the bench as a fellow waitress brought her a glass of a mint margarita. I am sorry, sir, but you cannot approach the waitress during her working hours. The head waiter, who was standing by the stairs of the stage, stopped Keith when he was about to step on it. I am not approaching the waitress, and only wish to play some music. Rest assured that I know what I am doing. He lightly smiled at the man, who was now feeling quite awkward. May I contact the manager and inform him of your request? Go ahead. Keith appreciatively nodded when he found the man staying true to his job. And unsurprisingly, the manager of the place told the head waiter to let him do as he pleased. Of course, it was only because Keith had spent a handsome amount of money in the couple of hours he had dined here for. My apologies, sir. I hope you did not mind my intrusion. The waiter bowed to him after the manager gave his go. It's your job, and you are doing great, Keith lightly told him and descended the stage. As soon as he stepped on it, whispers and murmurs started sounding as the audience was surprised to see such a handsome boy appear on the stage. Sensing the change in the audience and the voices around her, Alana curiously turned to look back, and just a look made her innocent heart skip a beat in surprise. May I take the seat? Keith flashed her his devilishly perfect smile and asked. Chapter 25, May I? Keith asked again after he found the little girl enchanted by his charm. Sorry, Alana furiously blushed and hurriedly stood up from the bench. Stay seated, it's big enough for the two of us, he casually said without looking at her, and sat on the bench, closing his eyes to clear out all the distracting thoughts from his mind. She was hesitant to stay seated right next to him, but when she found him lost in his own world, she sat down on the edge, sipping on her margarita as quietly as possible. After a minute, Keith opened his eyes with a fond smile adorning his face. His long slender fingers lightly brushed on the keys, playing nothing in particular, but it still sounded sweet to everyone's ears. And then he stopped, and the moment his fingers fell on the keys again, he hooked the entire audience. A soothing melody whispered in the ears of everyone, and subconsciously, they stopped whatever they were doing to just bask in this enchanting melody. What he was playing was a song from his memories of the dream, and the song did not exist in the world he was loving in. Merry-Go-Round of Life, one of his favorite pieces of music by one of his favorite music composers. As the intro ended and the tempo built up, the surprise and awe of the audience only heightened. It was a song that spoke to everyone, no matter what sort of mood they were in. For some, it whispered to their sad memories, yet not allowing them to wallow to their sorrow, and for some, it brought out their happy moments to the front of their minds, bringing sweet smiles to their faces. But none of them were more shocked or surprised than the girl who was sitting by his side, enchanted by not just the music, but also hypnotized by the elegant yet strenuous dance his fingers were performing on the keys. Keith was oblivious to what he was doing to people, his mind was only occupied with the music he was playing. As it was the first time he was playing it outside of that dream, he was determined to do justice to this marvelous piece of music. Minutes passed, the melody sounded out again, followed by another tempo that dazed the minds of the inexperienced as they looked at his hands fighting a strenuous battle. And then the song ended, leaving the people in a strange mood where they both felt fulfilled yet desired more of it. Keith took a few short breaths and smiled devilishly as he stared at his slightly shivering hands. He felt that he could have done better than he did, but at the same time, he was proud of his performance. Someone in the crowd was just about to stand up and clap for his performance, when another piece of music started sounding out the lounge. This time, the beat was too catchy, filled with happiness that spoke to both young and old. People subconsciously chuckled as some sweet memories appeared in their mind. Most were smiling fondly as they listened to music and reminisced about their childhood. There were some youngsters who were recording everything on their cell phones, and the girls in the audience were helplessly falling for the mortal who seemed like an immortal in their lovesick hearts. By now, Alana had been completely blown off with the beauty of the music, and unbeknownst to her, her heart was beating to the rhythm of the music. What Keith was playing was a song called Windy Hill, and it too was one of his favorites. And of course, it belonged to his dream. As the song ended, the people were already up on their feet, just waiting for the moment, and then fervent applause greeted the young Demiliore. More, a fangirl screamed from the audience, who then pressed for him to play it again. Again, please, more, comma dot. Keith chuckled when he heard their requests and then turned to look at the girl by his side. I have another venison of the song. Want to hear it? He softly asked with a light smile, and the maiden's heart fluttered in sweetness she was not yet fully aware of. Yes, she subconsciously nodded, and Keith grinned before looking back at the keys. His fingers fell again, the crowd quieted down, and then an enchanting melody imprisoned them. This time, he was playing A Town with an Ocean View. A piece of music he was really fond of. Alana couldn't help her giggles at the music that called out to her childlike soul that had been suppressed by the harshness of time. There was just something about this music that they all fell in love with, and even the old generation enjoyed it just as much as the young ones. The song ended, but Keith did not stop playing. Join me, he lightly said and shifted to the left side of the piano, leaving the keys on the right in the care of Alana. She was too hooked to the music to realize what she was doing, and her hands instinctively fell on the keys, playing the melody with him. Keith mischievously smiled, and then changed the music to some random melody that had appeared in his mind. Alana realized it, and replied with her own, something that complimented him. And then started the playful fight between them, where he chuckled and she giggled, with time to time throwing proactive, yet playful, glare at each other. The audience soon realized what was happening, but the music was still refreshing and pretty, so they just enjoyed it. Watching the two of them play with such familiarity broke the hearts of many girls, and even some boys were sighing at their display of affection. When their battle ended over half an hour later, they both received a round of applause, and they both gracefully bowed to the crowd, accepting their appreciation. Come with me, I need to talk to you about something, Keith whispered near her ear before walking off the stage, towards the table where Cesar, Yinjing, and Victor were sitting. A few people on the way stood up and greeted him, and he stopped to politely shake hands with them, sharing a few good words. Alana was left conflicted on the stage, as the realization had finally dawned on her that something was not right with her. She no longer looked confident and composed but seemed like just another maiden, who was finding herself dangerously attracted to a boy whom she had never met before. There was something in the back of her mind, whispering to her to run away, but she ignored the wails of destiny and finally walked towards the devilishly handsome boy. Master, you were brilliant, Victor enthusiastically spoke as soon as Keith arrived at the table. The simpleton knew nothing about the theory of music, but he was still capable of discerning and appreciating the beauty of the art. It was truly a marvelous performance, Master Keith. Cesar too appreciatively spoke. Thank you. Keith smiled at him and nodded, before taking his seat. Yinjing was about to ask him the names of the songs he passed when a timid girl approached their table. Sit. Keith stood up from his seat and pointed at the seat next to Cesar, which was vacant. Perhaps it was because of the presence of another girl on the table that helped her nerves, as she nodded to him and calmly took the seat. My name is Keith. He introduced himself with a smile and then turned to look at his companions. This lovely lady is Yinjing, the simpleton is Victor, and the old man's name is Cesar. Alana couldn't help the smile that crept on her face at his casual yet interesting introduction of his companions. My name is Alana, she sweetly spoke in an enchanting voice. You have a very lovely voice, Alana. Keith put up a surprised look and commented. And you are remarkably gifted in music. The sudden praises made her burn in embarrassment, yet she did not feel too awkward because of how amiable Keith sounded. You said that you had something to talk to me about, she lightly spoke to get over her anxiety. Yes, it's a very important matter, and I dearly hope that you would accept my offer. An offer? Alana frowned and curiously asked. I want to offer you a contract and sign you for my company. As a music composer, and since you have such a lovely voice, I am sure you can sing a little too. Alana hesitated a little before shaking her head. I can't sing. Is it because of the irritation that you feel in your throat when you try to raise the voice? Keith lightly smiled at her. How do you know? She surprisedly looked at him, and he chuckled at how adorable she looked. I am a doctor, silly girl. A very accomplished one, and so, I can tell it. I thought you were a musician, she exclaimed, still surprised. No, I am not. I just play because I love music. I don't have time and intentions to start a career in it. Keith smiled at her, and primarily, I am a businessman and then a doctor. Oh, she did not know what to say to him, but then when she thought that she should at least say something, she blurted whatever came to her mind. You are awesome. All of them chuckled at her words, and Keith nodded his head unreservedly. Yup, I am awesome. His proclamation only made her blush more at her silliness. Now let's talk about the business. Keith suddenly turned serious. As I said, I want to offer you a contract to sign up with my company, and I will help you establish a successful music career. With your talent, it won't be hard to accomplish everything. Think about it carefully. It is once in a lifetime opportunity. Alana had her doubts, but she could sense the sincerity from his words. If she had not witnessed his musical performance, she might have been very hesitant to believe in his words, but now she subconsciously believed in what he said. Would I have to leave this job? Of course, silly, he chuckled. I am offering you a full-time job that will pay you so much more than what you are earning here. But I have a contract with the restaurant, I will pay the termination penalty. Don't worry about it. Keith waved his hand and said, no matter how much it is, it would be nothing in my eyes. But I will cut it from your future salary if you are still hesitant about it. Alana nodded to this and then frowned as she thought things over. What exactly will I have to do? You will make music and will be given a free hand to make whatever you want. You will get access to a music studio, and whatever you need to compose your music will be provided to you. Your creations will then be judged, and after you are given the green light, your music will be published and distributed under my company's label. You will get a handsome share of the earnings, and my company will get the rest. And then there will be side jobs, which depend on your popularity as an artist. In short, the more popular you grow, the more you will earn. Side jobs, concerts and tours. Also, some production companies might want to hire you to make music for them, and if you choose to accept their offer, my company will be responsible for representing you in those ventures. It will provide you with security so that your music will not be taken advantage of. My music will belong to your company. Yes, it will be shared ownership. However, I will make sure that there are no artistic restrictions on your work. It sounds too good, she murmured as she thought over things. Of course, a young girl like her did not know the ins and outs of the industry, but she could feel that the offer would be a life-changing decision for her. If you agree, I will fix your problem and you will be able to sing properly. Keith devilishly spoke, and then laughed lightly when he saw her stressing under her thoughts. Don't worry, I will fix the problem for you even if you choose not to accept the offer. I accept, Alana blurted out. Awesome. Keith laughed happily and then poured himself some wine in her glass of water. Cheers. Chapter 26. Wearing a black turtleneck shirt and cream-colored tapered pants, a suffocatingly handsome boy sat on a table, finishing up his breakfast. Right in front of him, sat a pair of a man and a woman, nervously waiting for him to speak. He had not said a word to them since they had arrived here, and it had already been half an hour. Time passed, and under their nervous glances, the boy eventually finished the breakfast, cleaned his mouth with a napkin, and signaled to the waiter to clean up the table. Next time, do not come early to curry my favor. I only appreciate those that stick to the time they are given. Keith checked his watch, and as soon as the clock dial showed 10 a.m., he smiled at the aged man and pointed out his folly. My apologies, Heir Demiliore. Keith waved his hand and stopped him from speaking. It was a rude thing to do to someone who was more than twice his age and a renowned person in the society, but the old man did not seem to have a speck of dissatisfaction on his face or in his heart. I understand your nervousness and the anxiety. Keith lightly spoke and then scrutinized the woman the old man brought with him. Have you brought the contract? Yes. The old man hurriedly nodded his head and presented the file to him. All the terms have been accorded as you asked for. I see. Keith took his time flipping through the contract, and only after thoroughly checking it did he close the file. Good job. Now then, let's talk about business, Mr. Warner. The old man straightened his back, even more, staying attentive to what Keith had to say. Over the years, you have done a really good job. The company is doing great under your command, and I have decided to keep you as the CEO of the Black Jay Records, which is now under the banner of my Black Forest group. Warner heaved a sigh of relief at hearing Keith's words, and a sincere smile appeared on his face. The structure of the company will remain the same, and you will work just like you have been doing under the command of my mother. And you will still get the percentage of dividends that you are currently entitled to. I will not let down your trust in me, Heir Demiliore. Warner assured him with confidence. Good. Keith nodded his head and then glanced at the woman before looking at Warner again. And there's something I want you to put your utmost attention to. Speak and it shall be done, Heir Demiliore. Warner nodded unhesitatingly. It was only because he believed that Keith would not ask him to do anything that would jeopardize the company under his command. He had high expectations of the young man in front of him, who happened to be the son of an accomplished business magnate, his former boss, and also the heir to one of the most powerful families in the country of Netheria. I want you to understand that Alana is off limits to anyone. No matter who they are. He intently spoke, and Warner grew a little apprehensive in his heart. We both know how the showbiz industry works, but you are not going to allow Alana to fall into those seductive yet lucrative pits. And if you find yourself hard-pressed by someone with enough power, you will simply guide them to me, and I will take care of the matter. Seeing Warner nod to his words, he continued. I don't want anyone whispering stupid words in her ears, and I don't want her to do stupid things for publicity. You understand what I mean, right? He narrowed his eyes at the old man, who readily nodded his head. Good, because if she comes under harm, or she is made to do anything I did not want her to do, his voice grew icy cold at this point. You and this lady by your side will be the first to suffer, and then that suffering will befall on those dearest to the two of you. Both their hearts palpitated in fear at the blunt threat by Keith, and the old woman felt chills run up her spine because she realized his words were mostly directed at her. Please rest assured, Heir Demiliore. I will do my job as Lady Alana's manager to the best of my abilities. And I will heed to your warning. Your good performance will not go unrewarded, Miss Hamilton. Keith nodded his head and then sipped on some white wine. You may take your leave now, Mr. Warner. Thank you for coming to see me on such short notice. His words were polite, and more than what a man like Warner could afford. Even if he could not sleep last night and had to travel all the way from Alfindra, the showbiz capital of the country, to Magic City, which was thousands of miles away, he was still happy in his heart to learn that everything was going to be fine. Please don't thank me, Heir Demiliore. The subordinate is only doing his job. Warner stood up from his seat and then bowed to him. Only after Keith nodded, did the old man straighten his back and took his leave. Alana will be here in half an hour. You can order whatever you want to eat if you are hungry. He left the old woman with those words and headed to his suite. Yinjing was quietly sitting at the study table, going through the sheet music that he had written right before going for breakfast. Keith knew that she had an interest in music too, and he could see that she was quite attracted to the music that had played yesterday at the restaurant. You can keep copies of these for yourself. He softly spoke before sinking on the couch, and Yinjing nodded her head, not showing any emotions on her face. Here is the property deed, master. She picked up a folder and brought it to him. He did not need to look at it and just accepted it from her hands. Where's Uncle Cesar? After we finished the task you assigned us, Lady Vanessa called him and instructed him to go to the Montail estate and finalize the bride price with them. I see. Keith nodded his head and then tapped on the place right by his side. Sit. Yinjing did as asked, but then tensed up when Keith wrapped his arm around her and pulled her closer to him. So, does my Yinjing want me to teach her how to play merry-go-round of life? He mischievously whispered near her ear. As good as she was at hiding her expressions, her ears still turned red at him addressing her as his Yinjing. Her heart was quite troubled at his words, but then mustered up some courage and then nodded her head. Say it, he stressed. I want Master to teach me how to play merry-go-round of life. And Windy Hill, she softly spoke. Cute, Keith commented and then planted a kiss on her cheek. I will teach you when we return home, okay? Yes, she quickly nodded her head, still trying her best to not allow her anxiousness, anticipation, and happiness on her face. Keith sighed in his heart when he saw her behave that way. He knew he could change it all in just one night, but he did not want to rush things with her. He found himself enjoying her adorable attempts to hide her affection for him, and he wanted to see how long she could hold herself back. Brush my hair, he commanded and then rested his head in her lap, closing his eyes. Yinjing's heart skipped a beat, and a sweet smile threatened to appear on her face, but she hid it well. She softly started combing his hair with her fingers and felt his body relaxing under her ministrations. Keith loved having his hair combed this way, and the feeling of Yinjing doing it for him was quite different from what he felt from his mother, but he loved it too. Time passed, which the two of them did not pay a fraction of their attention, and finally a knock came on the door to their suite. Yinjing and Keith recognized who it was just from the knock, and the latter opened his eyes and stood up, before lazily stretching his arms. Thank you. He pecked a kiss on her cheek after wearing his shoes and then walked up to the door to open it. Good morning, Alana. He brightly smiled at the young girl, who was nervously fidgeting at the door, standing next to Victor. Good morning, Keith. A faint blush crept on her cheeks when she saw his brilliant smile, and couldn't help but stare at him. Let's go. I will introduce you to your new manager, and then you can go through the contract. Done. Alana nodded her head and took a deep breath. How's your throat feeling? He casually asked to lighten up the mood, and it worked. It feels good. She happily smiled at him. You are a brilliant doctor, Keith. She was quite skeptical at first when Keith had treated her by simply giving her neck a type of massage. And if she was being honest, it was too comfy, and as she recalled the sensation, the blush on her cheeks brightened up. And after she returned home, she took the prescription, which was a honey syrup mixed in with a few herbs, and slept soundly. When she woke up this morning, she did not feel the usual irritation that was always there when she woke up. And she did her best to not allow her curiosity to win over. Keith had advised her against testing her vocals for the next few days, and so she was still being extra careful to not speak loudly. Thank you, he smiled back at her. Just keep taking the prescription for a week, and then you will be free of this problem. Chapter 27. Susanna Hamilton thought that she had seen it all in the world. After all, she had lived for 50 years, and had been connected to the showbiz industry for nearly 35 years now. But seeing Alana go through her contract, and not realize how blessed she was constricted her heart. At first, she thought that the heir of Demiliore family was planning on raising a mistress, but as she looked at the contract, she realized that it was a real deal with the highest of the benefits that any music artist could ask for. And surprisingly, it was well within the grounds of rules and regulations. Keith had not put anything in there that could harm the business of the company. So, what do you think? Keith smiled and asked when Alana finally finished reading the contract. The starting bonus of 600,000 isn't too much, she apprehensively asked. She had never seen money being dealt in such an amount. For a poor girl like her, 600,000 was really too much. No, it is not. Keith shook his head. It's just the sign-up bonus, and since you won't be getting any salary and all the money you make depends on the sales of your future music. This money is an amount that can keep you afloat for a while. I don't need so much money to survive a couple of months. It is what it is, and it cannot be changed. Keith shrugged her words off. You will have to change your lifestyle eventually, so get used to it. Alana was still a little conflicted but nodded her head in acceptance. Her heart was filled with utmost gratitude to Keith, and she vowed to live up to his expectations. About clause 16, I cannot be in a relationship before turning 20. Yes, it is a sacrifice you would have to make if you want to become successful. Since my company is investing in you, we don't want you to get distracted from your goals. And this clause will no longer bind you after your 20th birthday. Do you think 20 will be too late to find yourself a lover? He teasingly smiled at her. No, that's not what I meant. Her face was burning in a blush under his gaze and she embarrassedly lowered her head. I was just curious about the need of this clause. I don't really have anyone I like in that sense. Good. So we can assume that you are satisfied with everything in the contract. Yes. The chocolate-haired girl nodded her head and then picked up the pen to sign the papers. As soon as they were signed, her new manager Susanna got to work and picked up the papers before scanning them on her laptop and submitting a legal copy to the company. All done. The bonus will be transferred to your bank account in the next half an hour. Congratulations on signing with the Black Jay Records. Keith stood up and shook hands with the girl. Thank you. Keith then gestured to Susanna to leave them alone, and took Alana with him outside the hotel. You are not hungry, are you? He asked again. She had earlier refused to eat anything in the restaurant, fearing the expense, but now that they were outside, she did not want to make up excuses in front of the boy who was doing so much for her. I had a light breakfast, and since there's only a couple of hours in lunchtime, I will eat then. So you are hungry. He chuckled and shook his head. Alright, we will wait for lunchtime, but it's your treat. Okay, now that she was going to have lots of money on her hands, she wanted to, at least, treat Keith to a sumptuous meal to thank him. Master, Yinjing arrived not long after, handing Keith 2 folders. Thanks, Yinjing. He smiled at her and then walked up to the car together with the 2 girls. He tipped the valet handsomely, and then got into the driving seat, with Yinjing in front and Alana sitting in the back. Where are we going? Alana curiously asked. To your new home. Keith chuckled at her and then handed her a folder. Alana nervously opened it and then heaved a sigh of relief when she saw that it was only sheet music. But then happily smiled when she realized which songs these were. You wrote it for me. Of course, you asked for it. And so here are the 3 songs and their arrangements. Thank you, you're welcome. He smiled and then glanced at the address that Yunjing had pinned on the GPS. For a moment I thought you really bought me a new home. In her happiness the words in her heart fell out of her mouth, which made Keith laugh lightly. I am indeed taking you to your new house. What? Alana horrifiedly looked at him. Keith, I can't take it. The place I am currently living in is big enough for me and my little brother. We are fine. No, you are not fine. Keith sighed and shook his head. Don't lie to me. Alana lowered her head as her eyes turned misty. Don't worry, the new house is not in your name. It is in my name, and I am only renting it to you. Keith glanced at her state in the rearview mirror, and light said. His words made the guilt-gripping Alana's heart fade away, and she hurriedly wiped her eyes. Thank you, she softly said, and her voice was filled with gratitude. She really did not want to owe Keith any more than she already did, and if she was only renting the house, she could accept it. It would allow her to sell their old place and escape from that hellhole which was infested with goons and drunkards. Alana did not ask how much the rent would be as she believed that Keith would eventually tell her. She was sure that it would not be anything that she could not afford. Subconsciously, she had started trusting Keith like she had never trusted anyone. And what was ridiculous was that it had been less than a day since she had met this boy. Lost in her thoughts, the little girl forgot the passage of time, and when the car stopped, she looked outside the window to find herself at the entrance of a tall building, which she was very familiar with. It was one of the most famous residential buildings in the city, and also one of the most expensive places. It was the very place she once dreamed of living in. Her heart nearly dropped when she realized that she would be living here. You will be becoming a star, which means that you will be subject to unwanted attention. This place has good security, and it will be a safe place for you. Keith commented. Your little brother's school is not far from this place too, so it is perfect. Keith, it is too expensive. Really? He raised his brow at her in surprise. I thought you would be more than willing to pay 5,000 denar per month in rent. He reminded her again that she was only renting it, and when she heard that it was 5,000 denar, and even if it was a huge amount of money to her, it was a lot less than what she was expecting it to be. Only 5,000, she apprehensively asked. Of course, silly, he chuckled. Do you think I need your money? He grinned at her and she embarrassedly lowered her head. And that's not all, I need a personal favor too. What is it? She frowned and curiously asked. When you become a star, you won't refuse me if I approach you to become a face for any of my brands or projects. I promise. Alana smiled and readily nodded her head, feeling sweet in her heart. Alana was flabbergasted when they arrived inside the condo that was going to be her new home. It was so beautiful and refined that she could not help the excitement in her heart. The place came with the furniture which was specifically chosen by designers to complement it, and also, this place simply had everything. The kitchen was an open space, connected with the dining area, and then there were 4 bedrooms with individual restrooms, a lounge, and an office with a piano, which she planned on turning into a home studio in the future. There was also a leisure room with a pool table, and a place to sit and play on consoles for 5 to 6 people, and she knew that her little brother would love it. Alana then walked onto the balcony, and gasped at the view of the city. They were on the 66th floor, and the view from this height was exhilarating. Like it. Keith stood behind her leaning against the glass door with his arms folded on his chest, playfully smiling at her. Love it. She excitedly jumped on her feet and clapped her hands. Good. He sighed in relief and then stood straight. Let's go and find a place to eat, I am starving. Alana giggled at his words and nodded her head. If you don't mind, can we pick up my little brother from school? I would like to introduce you to him, she requested with much hope, and was relieved when Keith agreed. Sure, I want to meet him too. He amiably smiled at her and nodded his head. Of course, he wanted to meet her little brother. And why wouldn't he? Her brother was, after all, the very child of destiny she was meant for. Chapter 28 Bloomfield High was a semi-private middle and high school in the Magic City. It was not the most prestigious institution, but was still a renowned school in the city. At 2:15 in the afternoon, the students were already coming out of the school, with some heading to the parking, others to the third gate that was connected to the city metro, and the rest headed to the second gate to travel on their feet. Alana's little brother usually traveled on foot, so they were waiting outside the second gate for him. Seeing a ridiculously handsome boy leaning against a stylish black BMW and chatting with his 2 beautiful companions, the girls and boys of the Bloomfield High stopped and stared before starting their gossiping. Some brave souls even took out their cell phones and took a few quick snaps to send them to their friends. Time passed and the young boys and girls dispersed, but her little brother was yet to show up. And by now, Alana had a frown marring her beautiful face. Did he take the metro? She asked herself, but then her eyes caught someone coming out of the second gate, and she was familiar with this boy. Matthew, she called out to the lanky freckled boy, who was surprised to hear someone call out his name. When Matthew saw who called out his name, a troubled expression marred his face, which did not miss the eyes of the Keith and the girls. Who's he? Keith curiously asked. My little brother's friend, Alana replied and then walked up to the boy who was hesitant to come up to them. How are you, Matthew? I am fine, Alana. The boy shied his eyes away and replied. If you are looking for Shan, he's in the tennis court. You should hurry up, and after saying that, he bolted away. What's up with him? Keith frowned and asked, but then a light smile crept on his face when he saw Alana rush inside the school in anxiousness. Of course, he knew what must be going on with her little brother. Let's go, he called out to Yunjing before chasing Alana inside the school. The little girl was giving her all, but she was no match for Keith and Yingying, who caught up with her in no time. But the two stayed quiet and let her lead them to her little brother. When they arrived at the tennis courts, Alana's eyes widened in horror. Her little brother was lying on the court, surrounded by a few boys who were cursing at him, and a boy with blonde hair was kicking him in the back. Shan, Alana called out, and the sudden shout alarmed the boys who warily turned to look at the entrance of the tennis court. Run, a boy called out and the rest were off even before him. Yinjing, Keith lightly said, and then without even looking at those boys, he walked up to the pair of siblings. Alana was shedding tears as she looked at the state of her little brother. Let me check. Keith crouched by her side and placed a hand on her shoulder. His words reminded her that he was a doctor. She quickly wiped away her tears and allowed him to check her little brother. The young boy, who was around 14, had distinctive Asian features, but it could be seen from his brown hair, high cheekbones and hazel eyes that only one of his parents was Asian. Chan looked warily at the older boy who was inspecting his body, and hissed a little when Keith pressed his fingers near his left ribs. Don't worry, it's not broken, just a bruise and a little trauma, Keith assured him and then helped him sit up. The only thing that will take time to recover is your bruise on the left eye. The rest of them are minor muscle injuries and the bruises will be gone in 3 to 4 days. You are a tough kid, eh? He chuckled a little. Chan frowned at his words and lowered his eyes, not daring to look at his sister who was now seething in rage. What happened, Chan? Alana coldly asked. Now that Keith had assured her that there were no serious injuries, she could place her mind on other matters. Nothing, Chan. I said nothing happened. He clenched his fist and shouted back at her, which surprised her and then a pained expression marred her beautiful face. Chan regretted his words as soon as he saw his sister hurt by his words, but he refused to speak to her and diverted his eyes away from her. Alana watched him slowly get up on his feet and walk up to the other side of the court, where his school bag was. He's not in a good mood, Alana. Keith softly whispered to her and then glanced at Yunjing, who was coming over, dragging 2 of the boys who had ganged up on Chan by their collars. We can ask them about what happened. Alana turned to look in the direction of Yunjing, and then her eyes turned severe when she caught sight of the blonde boy who was kicking her brother. You? She stood up on her feet and stomped her way towards the 2 boys, who were groaning in pain. Why were you hurting my brother? Keith did not miss the anxiousness on Chan's face when Alana interrogated the boy. It was obvious from his reaction that he was partly or mostly responsible for what befell him. Chan broke my smartwatch, the blonde boy fearfully spoke, and his words took Alana by surprise. It must be an accident. No, it was not. The other boy hurriedly interjected. He snatched it from Henry's hand and then smashed it into the wall. We were just getting back at him, Henry, the blonde-haired boy, gritted his teeth and added before glaring at Chan. You were shoving it into the face of the entire class. No one needs to know how cool or expensive your new watch is. Chan defensively shouted back, but his words only disappointed Alana and Keith more. I am sorry for his behavior, Alana apologetically said to the boys, and before she could say her next words, her little brother shouted at her in disbelief. Why are you apologizing to them? He could not believe his ears when Alana apologized to the boys who beat him up. Calm down. Keith indifferently looked at the young boy, who glared at him as a result, but then lowered his eyes and kept quiet after sensing the coldness in Keith's gaze. Alana thankfully nodded to him before turning to look back at the 2 boys. What he did was wrong, and they should have informed the school authorities about his behavior, not gang up on him and beat him up. She admonished the 2 boys, who paid little heed to her words. Her words are true, you know. Keith smiled at the dissatisfaction on their faces and walked up to them. How much was the watch worth? What, are you going to pay me? Henry frowned and asked, but Keith did not answer him. It cost 750 neres. Do you know that if you had put more power behind your hits and hurt him, breaking those ribs, or dealing permanent damage to his face, your bail would only start at 10,000 neres? The implications behind his words chilled the hearts of the 2 boys, and very marred their faces. I am sure your family could afford that, but there are people in the world who must not be trifled with. The coldness in his words made them shiver. Trust me, if I want to, I can send you behind the bars without bail, and you will serve your 3-month sentence. And when you come out, you will have a criminal record, and no prestigious university will be willing to accept you. You can even forget about getting yourself a respectable job in the society. I can do worse, but let's not talk about grim subjects. He patted the shoulder of the blonde-haired boy, who did not even dare to look at him. Keith took out a few bills from his wallet, and stuffed them in the pocket of the boy. Go now, and I hope any of this won't happen again. Both the boys were surprised at his actions, and hurriedly thanked him before turning to look at Chan. I am sorry, they both said in unison and ran away without waiting for Chan to respond to their apology. Alana felt relieved at seeing things turn out the way they did. Of course, Keith's approach was harsh and intimidating, but it was effective and got the best result. Thank you, Keith. Alana gratefully smiled at him. No worries, just some young boys dealing with their adolescence. He chuckled and Alana could not help but smile at his words. Chan. She approached her little brother and hugged him. Your sister has some good news for you. What? Chan was still dissatisfied at how things turned out, but seeing the genuine smile on her face, he did not have the heart to pursue the matter. I will tell you about it on lunch. Now let me introduce you to a friend of mine. She dragged him up to Keith. Chan, this is Keith, my friend and boss. And Keith, this is Yexeung Parker, my little brother. It's nice to meet you, Yexeung. He drew his hands forward and flashed a brilliant smile. Nice to meet you too. Chan shook his hand, but the smile on his face was a little stiff. The young boy could not tell why, but he felt a sinking feeling in his stomach when they shook their hands. But Alana did not let him fret over it and dragged him behind her to the outside of the school. Chapter 29 inches. So, he's not your real brother, Keith thoughtfully said. He's real, okay. Alana playfully glared at him. His parents adopted me when I was 6 years old, and I have always considered them my family. Even if I am not related to him by blood, Chan is my little brother. He smiled at the sincerity in her words and nodded to her. You are a wonderful sister, Alana. Thanks. She shied her eyes away from his gaze and looked at Chan, who was still inspecting his new room and settling some of his old stuff in it. Keith had brought the siblings to their old house after they had lunch at a relatively modest restaurant. He instructed them to finishing up packing before heading to their new home, and even if Chan felt a little uneasy about everything, he did not voice anything to harm her sister's happiness. The young boy was genuinely happy to learn that his sister got hired by a music company. But he was just uneasy about the presence of Keith in all of it. And while they were setting their stuff in their respective new rooms, Alana had decided to tell Keith about how their life had been after Chan's parents passed away. It turned out that her birth parents were real close friends with the Parkers, and when they passed away, the Parkers took her in as their daughter. They even gave her their last name, and even if they belonged to a low-middle-class family, they did everything to keep her happy and brought her up with all the care and love. It was just that their happiness was not meant to last, and the Parkers passed away last year, in an accident, leaving the pair of siblings on their own in the cruel world. At first, things were really harsh on them, but Alana bravely stood up and took charge of their house. She dropped out of school to work and earn, and made sure that Shan would not miss out on his studies. The little savings Parker's had was still there, and Alana did not touch any of it. She had kept it to help Shan through the college, and even if she had missed on a meal, she never let him go hungry. In short, she was a filial daughter and a responsible sister. And Keith could not help but admire her even if he everything about her already. Knowing something and seeing it for yourself were two different things, and he sighed at the perseverance of the young girl, which touched his heart. I will be leaving Magic City tomorrow, he lightly said, and Alana, who was putting some of her books on the shelf, stopped. When will you come back? I am not from Magic City, Alana. He chuckled and told her. I live in Cimmerian City, and just came here to deal with some private matters. Alana did not know why, but she felt a little uneasy at the idea of not having him around in the city. You have my number and you can contact me if you need anything. He reminded her when he found her lost in her thoughts. Also, when Susanna takes you to test out your vocals next week, do send me your audio clips. I will write you a few songs to start up your singing career. You are a lyricist too, Alana asked in surprise but then laughed at her own silliness. Of course, you are. How could the awesome and multi-talented Keith not be a lyricist? True that. He winked at her and then they both shared a laugh. I won't put my name on the lyrics, remember that. She intently looked at him and spoke. I don't mind if you put my name on them. He yielded to her unvoiced request, and saw a bright smile bloom on her face. Instruct Susanna and she will help you turn that office into a private studio. Also, you can ask her to help you with any matter. She's your manager, okay? She cutely nodded her head. Alright, see you later, Miss Alana. He waved his hand, turned around to walk out of the room. Wait, yes. He stopped and turned to look at her. You are leaving now. She did not know why she called out to stop him, and asked a silly question in a hurry. Yes, I have an appointment with someone special, and I need to be there on time. Oh, okay, she nodded her head. Take care, you too, be safe. He smiled at her and walked away. Only after he was gone, did Alana realize that he had spoken about someone special. Her brows furrowed a little but then she paid no heed to it. She carefully placed all her books on the shelf and then turned to look at her new room with fondness. Perfect. She giggled and clapped her hands happily. Alana, Shan called out from behind her. Yes, little brother. She happily walked up to him and asked. Is he gone, Keith? Yes, he will be going back to his hometown tomorrow. Hearing her words, Shan felt immensely relieved for reasons he was not even aware of. Don't you think he's a little suspicious? He carefully chose his words, but it still brought a frown on her sister's face. What do you mean? I mean, why is he so nice to you? Didn't you always say that there is no free lunch in the world? Shan looked her in the eyes and asked. So, what does he want from you? Yes, there's no free lunch, little brother. And what he is doing is investing in me. He told me that he considers me a potential asset for his company. She informed him. And as for why he's nice to me, it's just because he's a really nice soul. Are you sure? Shan felt a little uneasy at hearing her words and asked again. Shan, he's a good person, she coldly said, clearly telling him off to not think bad about Keith. Okay, the little boy frowned and nodded to her before leaving the room. What's up with him? Alana murmured to herself as she found her little brother behaving a little weird today. Out the building, inside a black BMW, a boy and a girl sat silently. The boy was holding his phone next to his ear, listening it ring. Yes, young master. As soon as the call connected, Cesar's voice sounded out. I want you to put someone capable as my eyes beside Alana. Put that person as one of her guards or a driver. Also, I need another capable person to always keep an eye of her younger brother. Help the little one out if he gets in any trouble, and if Alana grows suspicious, inform her that I put them by her side to protect them. Okay. It will be done, young master. Cesar nodded to his words. Lady Amelia asked about when you will be coming over. I will be there in an hour. Keith looked at the time on the clock and replied. Also, make sure that our trip to Bastille City is on schedule. I go through the arrangements one more time, young master. Rest assured. Keith ended the call and then started the engine. As soon as they drove out of the commercial street, Keith pressed the accelerator, making the car flash past the vehicles. He was being reckless in the untrained eyes, but the lady by his side knew that her master was natural at handling fast speeds. Even when they came to the foot of the hill range, Keith did not slow down and playfully drifted at the turns, climbing the height at a scary speed. Yinjing stole a few glances at his serious and focused eyes, and smiled inwardly. She always loved this look on her master's face, and she knew that even if he looked all so serious, he was really enjoying himself at this moment. Too bad that after all this burden, the poor vehicle will have to throw with her a maintenance check. Not that anyone cared about it. She turned to look at the dusky sky, and the clouds that seemed to be burning in a blush. And even if she rarely showed emotions on her face, it did not mean that she did not possess them. And in this moment, her silly heart wished that they could forever stay in a time loop. Just her and her master, a sinking sun, and blushing clouds. An exhilarating speed and the roar of an engine that traveled far, and the soothing silence inside the car. Her cheeks burned upon in a blush when Keith suddenly grabbed her hand, and locked his fingers with hers. Yes, it was a beautiful evening that will stay fresh in her memory for a long time. Chapter 30 inches. We have arranged the rooms for all of you, so just feel at home. An aged lady with the trademark green eyes of the Montail family informed Keith after he finished his meal and met up with his intended. Thank you, auntie. He amiably smiled at her, which elated her, and she patted his head lovingly before leaving him and Amelia alone in the hallway. Your aunt really cares about you. He looked her in the eyes and said. She's a good soul. Amelia turned around and walked ahead. Come with me. Keith smiled at her behavior and followed her all the way to her room. He playfully smiled at her when he saw her lock the door. Hey, I hope you don't plan to force yourself on me. Amelia only glanced at him before heading to the couch and sitting on it. Her eyes turned to look at him, seemingly waiting for him to do something, and Keith sighed before walking towards her and take a seat by her side. Yes, Amelia, how long do you plan to stay in this world? She straightforwardly asked, which took him by surprise, but then he gave it a thought and sank back on his seat. At least 10, and at most 13. He answered her after he went through all the storylines in his mind. His answer surprised Amelia, and she frowned a little. Are you sure you only need at most 13 years to reach the peak of spirit profound realm and enter the primal desolation? She asked. I don't need even half that time to reach that stage, but there are things that I must accomplish while I am here. What? Keith frowned at her question and then sighed. I can't leave behind those that are close to me, so I want to take them with me. It will take time. His answer only made her more curious, but she did not question him again about it. She could feel that she will get all her answers with the passage of time. Well, if we are staying here for a decade, I want you to help me start up my business. I don't like staying idle. I know, he chuckled and nodded to her, and I have already planned for you to join my new group. You will be the vice president and the mind behind the architecture and design of everything that our construction company will build. And you will be in sole command of that company. Again, Amelia was surprised at his words, but when she thought about how he knew everything about her, it made a little sense to her. Of all the knowledge I have received so far from the runic monarch profound veins, there was an interesting set of runes that I previously paid no attention to. She looked him in the eyes and spoke, but saw him waiting for her to continue her words. I may not necessarily know everything about the runes. After all, I am not the inheritor of the runic monarch, you are. Come, Amelia nodded to him, and saved this piece of information in the back of her mind. This set of runes is called the sacred wedlock. Oh, Keith's eyes widened in surprise and he lost himself in some thoughts. You know about it. She did not miss the spark of realization that dawned in his eyes. Yes, he nodded his head. The runes of sacred wedlock is a special ritual, where the couple take a divine vow, and then the runes are initiated. If the intentions of both the parties are true, the name of their partner will be forever engraved on their body in form of a rune. It's good that you know about it. She nodded to him. You want to perform the ritual? Keith narrowed his eyes and asked. Yes. Do you know any divine vow? He curiously asked, and sighed helplessly when she shook her head. I thought you would know. She frowned and said. I do know one, but I warn you. It's not a joke, he seriously said and looked her right in her eyes. We will be bound to each other forever till death do us apart. There's no such thing as a divorce when you initiate the marriage ritual with a divine vow, and this one is even more special. How special? She curiously asked him, unfazed by his warning. You will learn with time. He refused to tell her about it and then took a deep breath. You want us to perform that ritual on our wedding? We are doing it right now. She shook her head and said, leaving Keith with a dumb expression. What? Nothing. He sighed again and then smiled. All right, let's do it. And are you sure you have enough reserves to initiate the runes of sacred wedlock? I meditated all day to get ready. It should be fine. I never thought that you could sound silly too. He chuckled and teased her, which earned him a glare in return. Come. He raised his left hand to her, and she placed her left hand in his. They both stood facing each other, holding hands, and then Keith took a deep breath. Are you sure? Yes. She nodded her head with confidence. Say after me when I finish the divine vow. Keith had never before felt so nervous in his lifetime. He knew the gravity of a divine vow, and he took his time clearing his mind before speaking his next words. Time, space, life, death, spirit, fate, emotions, divination, and judgment, I invoke thee. Let the law of death be our judge. Let the law of life be our guardian. Let the law of spirit be our bond. Let the law of emotions be our blessing. Let the laws of fate and divination be our witnesses. Let the laws of time and space be our prisons, and let the law of judgment befall us. From this moment until the ends of times. I, Keith, I, Amelia, take you as my lawful wife. Take you as my lawful husband. I am yours and you are mine. In happiness and in sadness. In sickness and in health. In glory and in shame. In fortune and in misfortune. In life and in death. I promise to stay by your side. Forever and ever. As soon as they took their vows, the sacred runes of wedlock lit up on their own. Keith stared in marvel at the beautiful runes that lit up on Amelia's body. He could still not see those hidden under her clothes, but the ones on her arms were visible to him. The runes of a divine language slowly crawled over her left arm and then made their way onto his left hand that was connected with hers. The runes covered his entire hand before settling at the back of it. They both gasped in surprise when a brilliant golden glow sprouted from their hands and enveloped them, basking them in a soothing sensation, and before they could grasp what was happening, the glow receded back to their hands, where a beautiful rune was now permanently embedded. Even if Keith could not read the language, he knew that it was Amelia's name that was now etched on the back of his hand. And for Amelia, it was his name, which she could read. They both could feel a weight of responsibilities on their hearts, and Keith, who realized the weight of the divine vow, could not help himself but step forward and plant a kiss on her forehead. She was his lawful wife now, and she was his responsibility. Amelia felt lightheaded as soon as he did that and all the tiredness came crashing onto her. She did not realize it before, but invoking the sacred runes of wedlock had sucked all of her aura reserves. Keith wrapped his arms around her just as she was about to stagger, and then gently picked her up before taking her to the bed. He laid her down in the bed, and then took off her shoes before taking his off too and climbing into the bed. He lay by her side staring at her, just like she was doing with her half-lidded eyes. But soon sleep whispered in her ears, and her eyes closed. Keith affectionately smiled at her and then leaned in to plant a kiss on her head before wrapping an arm around her protectively, drifting off to sleep together with her. While the newlyweds slept soundly, somewhere in the Magic City, in a condo within a tall building, a young boy confusedly stared at the blood leaking out of his nose before everything turned blank and he fainted.